democratic system, our capitalist system has been exposed. And the sad death of some of those uh, people, the migrant workers, is yet another tragedy that we have witnessed recently. So refugee status is not limited to certain people who are far away from us. Refugees are here along with us, living in our society, very close to us. So I think the topic that is being discussed today will certainly be of great interest and relevance to all of us in the contemporary period. So without wasting time, I would like to uh, request Professor Pramod K. Nair to begin his lecture, and all our participants to listen to the lecture. And I think there will be a few minutes for questions and responses, etc. Now we have about 215 participants. So over to Pramod K. Nair.
Thank you, Professor Jayakumar. One of my earliest invitations to Kerala University was also from Professor Ajay Kumar, incidentally, to the refresher course. Not a very exciting venue, of course, when you look at refresher course participants who simply want to get through the day and run away. Most of the speakers also want to get through the day and run away. So I was also privileged to be invited to deliver the Professor P.K. Rajan lecture organized by Professor Ajay Kumar. So it's quite a repeat performance, one could say. What I want to talk about today is part of a forthcoming work on the human rights graphic novel. It will release later this year, and what I'm speaking today is a section of that particular book dealing with novels, graphic novels that are about refugees. A couple of words about this. What I was doing in the book, what I have done in the book is looking at texts from all over the world. So I have got work from India, the United States, Native American writing, Eastern Europe, Africa, the Middle East, Vietnam, Japan, and looking at the theme of human rights and human rights violations. And while working on several of these rather traumatic texts, I encountered a bunch of fairly recent graphic novels on the refugee crisis. Olivier Kugler's Escaping Wars and Waves, Encounters with Syrian Refugees, Kate Evans's work on refugees in Greece and other places. It's a kind of episodic one. But also Eoin Colfer's well-known young adult fiction writers, Illegal. But also texts that some of us might be familiar with. Vishwajyoti Ghosh's This Side, That Side, which is a graphic novel on the partition of India, the two partitions, both Bengal and Indo-Pak. So this is part of that particular project, and the focus on vulnerability, precarity is and has been a continuing theme in my work for the last 5 books, more or less like a vulnerability quartet or a vulnerability quintet. I forget now the sequence, but yes, work on Bhopal, on extremes, on human rights and literature. So this continues my concern with precarious lives, vulnerable lives, and things like that. So that is more or less the background. About the refugee graphic novels themselves, these are non-fictional memoirs, biographies, constructed around interviews in many cases with refugees themselves. Olivier Kugler's Escaping Wars and Waves, for instance, interviews about a dozen people in refugee camps, and constructs a narrative around their lives, their past, their present. Kate Evans does the same thing in her work. So these are non-fictional reconstructions of refugee lives, their memories, their nostalgia, the reasons why they fled their quote-unquote homes and moved into quote-unquote new homes, and the events that accompany this process of displacement. Eoin Colfer's Illegal is about the very literal metaphor of the boat people, and a lot of the first part of the text is spent on the journey itself. I'm going to begin by sharing a screen image for you to take a look at. Please hold a second. This is from Kugler's work. It's the first page, and of this, it's actually it's a fuller page. So I'm going to show you in two parts. Yeah. So this is actual dialogue put in quote marks. This is a screen. This is a drawing of a mobile phone screen, and this boy in the corner is actually holding this phone, and it shows the blowing up of homes and residences. This is the image of injured legs after he has been shot at in his house, and the close-up of it. And note the arrangement of the image and the text. Kugler does interesting things. He labels things. So he draws these arrows, he numbers them, he writes little descriptions and captions. That's one. I will share one more for you to. All this takes a little adapting. This is the continuation of that image, the boy holding a phone. And the image you saw last time of the explosion is on his screen, and it is drawn. Now, one of the things we understand about the graphic novel is that the graphic novel presupposes somebody sitting and drawing. It's a very corporeal act of drawing. Somebody sits and draws, unlike print. So there is a very embodied act of production in the writing and drawing and the inking and the coloring of a graphic text. So this is an important point. Hilary Chute makes it in Disaster Drawn and other works. And it's something to keep in mind when we think in terms of the structure of witnessing. It's not the subject of my talk, but I would like you to keep this in mind. Now, what I want to begin with is this narrative strategy in Olivier Kugler's Escaping Wars and Waves, Encounters with Syrian Refugees, where he's at this point, and the two images that I've shown you, is drawing and telling us Wissam's story. Wissam is narrating how he got shot in his house in Syria, an incident that forced them to flee their homeland. And after describing the event on the facing page, Kugler draws Wissam from the waist down. The legs that you just saw are drawn fleshy and marked with bullet injuries. And in case you don't know what they are labeled bullet wounds in a very ekphrastic, realistic mode. The part above the knee is only a swirl of lines and curls. So it's only the leg downwards that you have a focused drawing. The part above the knee is just a kind of messy lines and curls system. One can vaguely discern an arm. One can vaguely discern a head leaning forward and down, as though checking his own legs. And oddly, you see another leg behind Wissam's body. Kugler transforms the flesh and blood Wissam into a quasi-spectral Wissam on the next page. So in the page preceding the one I have shown you, you have Wissam sitting and talking. So there is a full-bodied, corporeal, material, flesh and blood Wissam. And by the time we look at this particular image, he is a quasi-spectral figure, symbolizing a literal lessening of the person by virtue of being a refugee. So that's my first point about this image. There is a lessening, a reduction into a set of lines, rather than the embodied flesh of a realist painting, a drawing, or a photograph. So the reduction is shown in the form of those squiggles and those lines. And unlike a realist painting, which gives you large chunks of fleshy humans, you have actually got here a kind of spectralized, decorporealized, dematerialized image. This reduction or lessening is compounded by the fleshy and injured legs that are also drawn simultaneously. So flesh here is broken up. The person is debodied or spectralized. So Kugler makes sure we understand that vulnerability has been changed into helplessness. All of us, as Adriana Cavararo tells us via a reading of Judith Butler, all of us are vulnerable, but not all of us are helpless. Vulnerability is a condition shared by all humans, but helplessness is a degree higher or worse, as the case may be. So what Kugler is saying, is drawing for us actually, is that vulnerability has been exposed to helplessness, has been converted into helplessness as a consequence of very specific social, political, and legal contexts. Wissam's fleshy feet, as opposed to the spectral remainder of his body, intrude or stand upon a screenshot of a mobile phone, which also you have just seen. The screen shows missiles firing. The screenshot is an expanded image as though it is a blown up shot. And I use the word advisedly because the shot is of something being blown up. And the phone is held by a young boy, with both boy and the phone being drawn, as opposed to the blown up image of the phone, which is actually a photograph. So Wissam's injuries and his corporeal vulnerability, Kugler shows, are literally embedded in the war-torn Syrian soil seen on the phone screen. It symbolizes something much more than corporeal damage, with his feet touching Syrian soil in and on the image of the phone. Kugler shows how Wissam really never left Syria. His injuries are Syrian, his identity will remain Syrian, and embedded in the frame that is Syria, hence the role of the mobile phone's image in the form of the pages. Now, what I want to draw attention to here is that the drawing, the photograph, and even the material structure of the page, the construction of the page, all contribute to this theme of spectral versus corporeal, real versus disappearing. It is in the nature of the text itself. And I'm talking about the book, The Refugee